The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the sprawling gardens of the Hawthorne estate. The annual family reunion was in full swing, with laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint hum of conversation filling the air. But for me, it felt like a scene from someone else's life. I stood at the edge of the garden, clutching a glass of wine, feeling like an outsider in my own family. My name is Evelyn Hawthorne, and at 34, I was no stranger to the cold shoulders and whispered remarks that had followed me for as long as I could remember. My stepmother, Victoria, had made sure of that. She was the queen of this castle, and I was the unwanted guest. Evelyn. Victoria's voice cut through the air like a knife. She stood a few feet away, her designer dress shimmering under the string lights, her perfectly manicured hand holding a glass of champagne. I'm surprised you even showed up. After all, you were never really a Hawthorne, were you? The words hit me like a slap. I felt the eyes of my relatives turn toward me, their expressions a mix of pity and curiosity. My half-siblings, Charlotte and Daniel, stood beside Victoria, their faces smug. Charlotte, ever the dramatic one, pulled out her phone and held it up for everyone to see. "We've been updating the family photos," she said with a smirk. On the screen was last year's Christmas portrait, but my face had been carefully erased, replaced by a blurred background. "It's better this way, don't you think? More authentic." I felt my chest tighten. 20 years of family photos, holiday snapshots, and milestone celebrations, all being systematically erased. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were merely making the photos match what they'd been doing to me emotionally for years. My father, Richard Hawthorne, stood off to the side, his eyes fixed on the ground. The man who could negotiate million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat couldn't find the courage to stand up to his wife when it came to his own daughter. He hadn't spoken a word in my defense, just like he hadn't for the past 2 decades. "I think that's enough," my Aunt Margaret finally intervened, her voice firm. But the damage was done. The other guests, a mix of extended family and my father's business associates, were already whispering among themselves, their eyes darting between me and Victoria like they were watching a particularly juicy tennis match. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the cool liquid steady my nerves. "You know what's interesting, Victoria?" I said, keeping my voice level. "You spent 20 years trying to erase me, but here I am, still standing. Maybe the real mistake isn't who you think it is." Victoria's perfectly Botoxed face twitched. "Is that a threat, Evelyn?" "No," I replied, placing my half-empty glass on a nearby table. "Just an observation." And soon a fact. I turned and walked away, my heels clicking against the stone pathway that led to the front of the house. Behind me, I could hear Victoria already spinning my exit into another example of my difficult personality and inability to accept reality. What none of them knew was that 3 weeks ago, I'd submitted DNA samples to not one, but 3 different ancestry testing companies. The results were due any day now, and they would reveal far more than just my genetic heritage. They would uncover the truth about the Hawthorne family, a truth that Victoria had been desperately trying to hide for 2 decades. As I got into my car, I caught a glimpse of my father watching from the window of his study. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something flicker across his face. Was it guilt? Fear? But then he turned away, just as he always had. I thought back to how it all began, the day Victoria entered our lives. I was 16 when my mother died from a sudden illness. She'd been the heart of our family, a warm and vibrant woman who filled our home with laughter and love. Dad was devastated, lost in his grief, barely functioning beyond his work. Victoria appeared at one of Dad's business functions just 6 months after Mom's funeral. She was everything my mother wasn't: calculated, status-obsessed, and coldly ambitious. She also came with 2 children, Charlotte and Daniel, who shared their mother's talent for subtle cruelty. The wedding happened quickly, almost frantically, as if Dad were trying to patch the hole in our lives with the first available solution. I still remember standing in my bridesmaid's dress, watching Victoria walk down the aisle, feeling like I was witnessing the beginning of my own exile. The changes started small at first. My mother's belongings disappeared one by one, replaced by Victoria's modern, minimalist taste. Family dinners became formal affairs where I was constantly corrected on my manners, my posture, my choices. My childhood bedroom was redesigned without my input, transformed into a space I barely recognized. But it was the emotional erosion that cut the deepest. Victoria had a way of making every accomplishment of mine seem somehow lacking, while Charlotte and Daniel's achievements were celebrated extravagantly. When I got accepted to Stanford with a partial scholarship, Victoria merely raised an eyebrow and said, "Well, I suppose that's better than community college." When Charlotte got into Harvard 2 years later, they threw a party for 50 people. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my memories. It was an email notification from Ancestry DNA. Your results are ready to view. I pulled over into a nearby park, my hands shaking slightly as I opened my laptop. The truth I had suspected for years was about to be confirmed or denied. The reason for Victoria's desperate attempts to push me out of the family, her obsession with erasing my presence, her constant reminders that I wasn't truly a Hawthorne, it all came down to this. The site loaded, displaying a colorful chart of my genetic heritage. But that wasn't what I was looking for. I scrolled down to the DNA matches section, holding my breath as the names appeared. Richard Hawthorne, no match. The words stared back at me, confirming what Victoria had known all along. My father wasn't my biological father. But there was more. Something Victoria couldn't have known. Something that would shake the Hawthorne family to its core. Another name appeared in my close matches, Jonathan Hawthorne. 25% DNA shared. My father's younger brother. The black sheep of the family who disappeared 20 years ago, shortly after my mother's death. The man Victoria had claimed moved to Europe, cutting off all contact with the family. The man who, according to these results, was my biological father. Suddenly, Victoria's desperate attempts to erase me made perfect sense. She hadn't just been trying to push out an unwanted stepdaughter. She'd been trying to hide evidence of a scandal that could destroy the perfect family image she'd worked so hard to create. My phone buzzed again, another email, this time from 23andMe. Then another from Family Tree DNA. I had covered all my bases, ensuring there could be no doubt about the results. Each test told the same story. I wasn't Richard Hawthorne's daughter, but I was undeniably a Hawthorne. As I sat there in my parked car, watching the sunset over the city, I thought about the family gathering I'd just left. Victoria's smug declaration that I wasn't truly a Hawthorne had been half right, but not in the way she thought. The truth was far more explosive than anything she could have imagined. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd been saving for this exact moment. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for the call to connect. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Evelyn? Is it time?" Jonathan's voice was calm but carried a weight of anticipation. He had been waiting for this moment just as long as I had. "Yes, Uncle Jonathan," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "The results are in. Are you ready to come home?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, as if he were gathering his thoughts, or perhaps steeling himself for what was to come. "They'll try to stop us," he finally said, his voice low and cautious. "Let them try," I answered, my tone firm. I thought of Victoria's face when she realized her perfect world was about to crumble. The truth has a way of coming out, doesn't it? Jonathan let out a soft chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "You've got your mother's fire, Evelyn. She'd be proud of you." His words hit me harder than I expected. My mother had been gone for so long, but the mention of her still brought a sharp pang of grief. "I hope so," I said quietly. "But this isn't just about her. It's about us. About the family we could have been if Victoria hadn't torn it apart." "I know," Jonathan said, his voice softening. "I've spent the last 20 years regretting the choices I made. I should have stayed. I should have fought for you." "You are trying to protect me," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "Victoria made it clear that if you stayed, she'd expose everything. The scandal would have destroyed me, and you couldn't let that happen." "I understand that now." There was another pause, and I could almost hear the guilt and regret in his silence. "I should have been stronger," he said finally. "But I'm here now, and I'm not running anymore." Good, I said, feeling a surge of determination. Because we're about to turn this family upside down. Are you ready for that? More than ready, Jonathan replied, his voice firm. Where do we start? Meet me at the Liberty Cafe on Charles Street tomorrow morning, I said. We'll go from there. I'll be there, he said. And, Evelyn, thank you for giving me a chance to make things right. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. You don't have to thank me, Uncle Jonathan. This is as much for me as it is for you. We're in this together now. As I ended the call, another text came through, this time from Charlotte. Hope you enjoyed the party, fake sister. Don't bother coming to any more family events. We've already taken you off the guest lists. I stared at the message, my fingers tightening around the phone. Charlotte's words were meant to hurt, but they only fueled my resolve. I saved a screenshot of the message, knowing it would be useful later. Soon, Charlotte would learn what it truly meant to be removed from the family. Victoria's carefully constructed house of cards was about to come crashing down, and I had front-row seats to watch it happen. The sun had fully set now, casting long shadows across the park. In the distance, I could see the lights of the Hawthorne estate glowing like a beacon. They thought they were celebrating my final exile tonight, but they had no idea this was just the beginning. The next morning, I arrived at the Liberty Cafe early, my nerves on edge. The cafe was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered around, sipping coffee and tapping away on laptops. I chose a table near the back, where we could talk without being overheard. Jonathan walked in a few minutes later, and I recognized him immediately. His dark hair was now streaked with silver, and lines creased the corners of his eyes, but he carried himself with the same easy confidence I remembered from my childhood. He scanned the cafe, and when our eyes met, a smile broke across his face, the same crooked grin I saw every morning in my mirror. Evelyn, he said softly, sliding into the seat across from me. You look just like your mother. The words hit me harder than I expected. Everyone always said I looked like my mother, but hearing it from Jonathan, my biological father, gave it new meaning. Thank you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That means a lot. Jonathan reached across the table, placing his hand over mine. I'm sorry, Evelyn. For everything. For leaving, for not being there for you. I can't change the past, but I want to make things right now. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. I know. And I'm glad you're here. But we have a lot to talk about. We do, he agreed, leaning back in his chair. Where do you want to start? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. Why did you leave, Jonathan? Really? I need to know the truth. Jonathan's smile faded, and he wrapped his hands around the coffee cup I'd ordered for him, as if seeking comfort in its warmth. It's a long story, Evelyn. And not a pretty one. I've got time, I said, my voice firm. And after what happened at the reunion, I think I deserve the truth. He nodded, taking a deep breath. Your mother and we never meant for it to happen. Richard was always the golden boy, the successful one. I was the family disappointment, the dreamer who couldn't settle down. But Sarah, she saw something in me that nobody else did. Did Richard know? I asked, my heart racing. No, Jonathan said firmly. Sarah never told him. We agreed it was better that way. She loved Richard, truly loved him. What happened between us was brief, a moment of weakness during a rough patch in their marriage. When she found out she was pregnant, she was devastated. I tried to process this information, matching it against my childhood memories. But you stayed around all those years, I said. You were always there for birthday parties, holidays. How could you stay away? Jonathan's voice cracked slightly. You were my daughter, Evelyn. Even if I couldn't claim you, I could be the fun uncle. Be part of your life somehow. But then Sarah died, and everything changed. Victoria, I said, the name tasting bitter on my tongue. Jonathan's expression darkened. Victoria. She figured it out, or at least suspected. She started digging into old family records, asking questions about Sarah's past. I knew it was only a matter of time before she discovered the truth. So you ran, I said, my voice flat. I left to protect you, Jonathan corrected. Victoria made it clear that if I stayed, She'd expose everything. The scandal would have destroyed your relationship with Richard, tainted your mother's memory. You were already dealing with losing her. I couldn't let you lose everything else too. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. Dad's furious about the DNA test. You've really done it now, freak. I showed Jonathan the message. Looks like the results have made it home, I said. Jonathan's jaw tightened. We knew this would happen. Are you ready for what comes next? I thought about Victoria's smug face at the reunion, about 20 years of subtle cruelty and calculated exclusion. More than ready, I said. But there's something you should know. I've been doing some digging of my own. I pulled out my laptop, opening a folder of documents I'd been collecting for months. Victoria's not as clever as she thinks. When she started erasing me from family photos, I started looking into her past. Want to see what I found? Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes widening as I showed him the evidence. Bank statements, property records, old newspaper clippings. Pieces of a puzzle that painted a very different picture of Victoria than the polished society wife she pretended to be. My God, Jonathan whispered. Does Richard know about any of this? Not yet, I replied. But he will. Victoria's been playing a long game, Jonathan. So have I. As if on cue, my phone rang. Richard Hawthorne's name flashed on the screen. Jonathan and I exchanged looks. The moment of truth had arrived. Hello, Father, I answered, keeping my voice neutral. What the hell do you think you're doing, Evelyn? Richard demanded. These DNA tests. Do you have any idea what kind of damage you could cause to this family? Funny, I said, my voice icy. I thought I wasn't part of the family. Isn't that what your wife's been saying? Evelyn, please. Richard's voice softened slightly. Come home. We can talk about this privately. Figure something out. Figure something out? I repeated, my tone sharp. Like how you figured things out when Victoria started erasing me from photos. Or when she turned my childhood bedroom into a yoga studio. Or maybe like how you figured things out when she told everyone at my college graduation that I was adopted. You're being dramatic, Richard said, though his voice lacked conviction. No, I'm being honest, I shot back. For the first time in 20 years, we're all going to be honest. I'm at the Liberty Cafe on Charles Street. Jonathan's here with me. Come join us. Bring Victoria, if you'd like. It's time for a real family reunion. The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice tight with emotion. Jonathan's there? My brother Jonathan's? Your brother, I confirmed. My biological father. But you already knew that, didn't you? Another long pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Richard said, then hung up. Jonathan let out a low whistle. You really think he knew? I think he suspected, I said, pulling up another file on my laptop. Look at this. 3 days after Mom died, he changed his will. Everything was left to me, with you named as my guardian if anything happened to him. Then, 2 months after marrying Victoria, he changed it again. Suddenly, everything went to Charlotte and Daniel, with me getting a token inheritance. Jonathan's face paled. He knew, and he paid me to leave, to protect the family name. I nodded. The great Richard Hawthorne couldn't have a scandal. It was easier to pay you off and pretend you'd abandoned us. Then Victoria came along with her perfect children and her perfect plan to reshape the family in her image. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and Richard Hawthorne stood in the entrance, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. His eyes locked onto Jonathan, and for a moment, I saw something pass between the brothers, 20 years of unspoken words and buried truths. Shall we begin? I asked, gesturing to an empty chair. Richard walked over slowly, like a man approaching his own execution. He sat down heavily, looking between Jonathan and me with a mixture of fear and resignation. Victoria? Jonathan asked. She's indisposed, Richard replied. She locked herself in the study when she saw the DNA results. She's been making calls all morning. Damage control. She's good at that, I said. But she can't control this, Father. Not anymore. Richard flinched at the word, Father. Evelyn, please. Whatever you're planning. I'm not planning anything, I interrupted. I'm just telling the truth. Something this family hasn't done in a very long time. I opened my laptop, turning it so Richard could see the screen. His face went ashen as he recognized the documents. Evidence not just of his own deception, but of Victoria's careful manipulation of the family fortune over the years. "Where did you get these?" he whispered. "I'm very good at my job, Father," I said. "Investment analysis isn't just about numbers. It's about patterns. And Victoria's patterns have been very interesting." Jonathan leaned forward. "What exactly has your wife been up to, Richard?" I answered for him. Shell companies, hidden accounts, systematic transfers of family assets into her name or her children's. She's been bleeding the Hawthorne fortune dry for years, positioning herself to take everything. The only thing standing in her way was me, the original heir, the one person who might notice what she was doing. So she had to discredit me, make me the family outcast, convince everyone I was unstable, unreliable, not truly a Hawthorne. And it almost worked. Except she got sloppy. She started enjoying the cruelty too much, got too confident. The photo editing was just the final straw. Richard buried his face in his hands. "I never knew about the money. I trusted her." "You trusted her with everything except the truth about me," I said quietly. "Why keep paying Jonathan to stay away if you trusted her so much?" Richard looked up, his eyes red. I couldn't face it. Sarah was everything to me, and finding out, I couldn't hate her, even after I figured it out. And I couldn't hate you, Evelyn. You were my daughter, in every way that mattered. But then Victoria came along, and she made everything seem so simple. Simple? Jonathan spat. "Is that what you call paying your own brother to disappear?" "I was trying to protect everyone," Richard shot back. "The scandal would have destroyed us all. Victoria promised she could fix everything, make it all go away. And instead, she nearly destroyed your daughter and stole your fortune." "Some fix," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. The cafe had grown quieter, the remaining patrons pretending not to watch the family drama unfolding before them. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably Charlotte or Daniel trying to figure out where their father had gone. "What do you want, Evelyn?" Richard finally asked, his voice hollow. I closed my laptop slowly, considering my next words. "I want the truth to come out. All of it. I want Victoria exposed for what she's done. I want my place in this family acknowledged, not erased. And I want both of my fathers to start acting like fathers." Jonathan reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. Richard stared at our joined hands, something like recognition flickering across his face. "Victoria will fight this," Richard warned. "She'll deny everything, try to discredit you." "Let her try," I said. "I have copies of everything, the DNA tests, the financial records, the proof of her systematic theft. She can deny it all she wants, but the truth is already out there. The only question is whether you'll stand with me this time, or let her destroy what's left of this family." Richard straightened in his chair, some of his old authority returning. "What's our first moves?" I smiled, pulling up a message on my phone. "Actually, it's already taken care of. While we've been talking, copies of everything have been sent to the family lawyer, the board of Hawthorne Enterprises, and every major shareholder. Victoria's probably seeing it all right now." As if on cue, my phone exploded with notifications, messages from Charlotte, Daniel, various family members, and finally, Victoria herself. You have no idea what you've done." I showed the message to Richard and Jonathan. "No, Victoria," I said, even though she couldn't hear me. "I know exactly what I've done. I've taken back my family,